Now, in the 17th century, Europe went through something of a revolution. Superstition made way for reason, new science, philosophy and politics swept away the medieval worldview. This was the period that shaped the modern mind. Or so says my guest today. He's the philosopher A.C. Grayling, and he joins me now to talk about his latest book, The Age of Genius, the 17th Century and the Birth of the Modern Mind. Lovely to have you here on Showcase.
Thanks for having me.
Now, some of the historians who have reviewed this book have said that it's not quite true. They'd say that these changes happened over a longer period of time, or perhaps the 18th century Enlightenment. Why do you say that this was the period, the 17th century, when it all changed?
Well, if you look at what educated people thought about themselves and about the world in the year 1600, and compare that to the same sort of people and what they thought in the year 1700, you see that there was a 90-degree shift in mindset. In the first couple of decades of the 17th century, anybody who publicly said that they agreed with the Copernican view that the sun is at the center of the universe and not the earth could be burned at the stake, and indeed a number were. And yet, in the last couple of decades of the 17th century, books like the one written by Bernard Fontenelle called On the Plurality of Worlds, which said the sun is at the center, all stars, suns, all stars therefore have planets around them. He could say this and publish a book about it with no fear of being burned at the stake. So these two facts by themselves show that there was an enormous change of mind in the 17th century, and that's a very interesting consideration.
So why the change of mind then, do you think?
Well, I think it was because there had been a movement leading up to the 17th century where increasingly people were demanding the chance to think for themselves and to inquire afresh about the world around them. And this meant that the hold that the Catholic Church, as was, had over the mind of Europe, demanding an orthodoxy of belief and outlook, that was falling apart. They tried very hard. I mean, right up into the 1630s, they prosecuted Galileo, for example, because of things he said about the nature of the universe. But this was the last throw of the dice by them. Mm-hmm. And so the grip on the possibility of doing scientific investigation and thinking about new ideas, that was loosening. And what burst the bonds finally was the idea of liberty of thought and inquiry, and therefore the birth of the more secular and more scientific outlook that is very distinctive of the 17th century.
And an outlook that you say we still have today. It was the birth of the modern mind. You also say that those countries, a lot of them going through strife today, are sort of living with a pre-17th century mindset. That's quite a controversial thing to say.
It is a controversial thing to say, but also it, I think, somewhat accurately reflects the fact that if there are orthodoxies of thought, and particularly religious orthodoxies of thought, so people are expected to believe exactly as everybody else believes in some particular set of doctrines. While that is the case, it's extremely hard for a society, a movement to do things that are new and fresh, look at the world in new ways, and accept most of what we have learned since the 17th century in the way of the natural sciences and their application via technology to our world, that the world isn't as the ancient mindsets and the old religions say it is.
So would you say then that the journey and mindset that Europe has been through is one that everyone in the world will go through?
Well, functionally, of course, in many ways, that's already happened, because look everywhere in the world and you will see refrigerators and motor cars and aeroplanes and airports and so forth. These are all the results of the application via technology of the scientific revolution. Sometimes people say, oh, well, why should we accept not just the technologies but the ideas as well? Democracy, the rule of law, freedom of expression, freedom of thought, all of which, by the way, were tremendously important in the birth of the modern mind, because without freedom of thought, freedom of expression, these new inquiries would never have taken place. Mm. And so people will accept the technologies, but they won't accept the ideas, and at the moment those ideas are causing lots of conflicts in the world. But I expect that the direction of travel of history is that eventually those ideas will prevail.
Briefly, if you can, and it's a big question, but you are first and foremost a philosopher, although this is something of a history book. How can philosophy help us in the everyday decisions that we make?
Well, I think philosophy has a number of different things to offer. One is it clarifies ideas, it clarifies the way we think about things. It makes us challenge those very deeply held assumptions that we may not know we have. And it also provides us from the great resource of the history of thinking about human beings and about human society, about the right and the good, and the way of thinking, learning, inquiring, and getting of knowledge. It can help us with this set of insights that philosophy has offered us, and which in the course of time has in fact been incredibly productive. Natural science came out of philosophy, psychology, linguistics, sociology, they were all born from philosophy. It's a very fertile set of debates.
A.C. Grayling, fascinating talking to you. Thank you so much for coming on to Showcase.